Cade Walker had spent most of his life believing he understood the desert, its quiet moods, its hidden dangers, its way of swallowing sound until a man could hear his own heartbeat louder than the wind. But that evening, as the sun slid low, across the New Mexico plains, something felt wrong in the air. The sky glowed orange over endless sagebrush, but beneath that beauty, there was an unease he couldn't explain. Then he saw movement, small, uncertain, stumbling. He slowed his horse, squinting. The shape wavered in the heat. For a moment, he thought it was an animal limping through the brush. But then the outline sharpened into something unmistakably human, a tiny figure alone where no child should be. Cade's chest tightened. Children didn't wander this far from camp unless something had gone terribly wrong. He urged his horse forward, the hoofs cutting lines through the dust. As he drew closer, the image became clearer. A little Apache girl standing barefoot in the sand, trembling as though the desert wind were too heavy for her small body. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands, clinging to her tear-streaked cheeks. She clutched a beaded pouch to her chest with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Cade slid from his saddle slowly, not wanting to frighten her, but she didn't flinch. She only looked up at him with wide, exhausted eyes and whispered one small word that broke his heart open: "Mama." Her voice wasn't panicked, it was tired, resigned, as though she had already cried all she could. Cade knelt in front of her, lowering himself until he was at her eye level. "You're hurt," he said softly, watching the way her shoulders shivered beneath her thin dress. She nodded, lifting one small hand to point toward the distant mesas across the desert. "Mama told me to hide," she whispered then. Gunshots, the last word left her lips like a wound reopening. Cade felt a heavy dread sink into him. Gunshots out here meant trouble, bandits, bounty hunters, or worse. And if this girl had been told to hide, her mother had been protecting her from something deadly. He swallowed hard, fighting to keep his voice calm for her sake. Without hesitating, Cade wrapped his coat around her, lifting her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, but the fear in her trembling made her feel heavier than a full saddlebag. She clung to him tightly, burying her face against his shirt. "It's all right," he murmured. "I've got you now. No one's going to hurt you." He mounted his horse with her tucked safely against him, keeping one arm around her small frame as he rode. The desert wind stung his face, but he pushed the horse harder, racing against the coming night. Whatever had happened out there in the wilderness wasn't finished yet. He could feel it like a storm pressing at his back. By the time Cade reached his ranch, dusk had swallowed the land. The horizon burned with the last red light of day, turning his cabin into a shadowed outline against the skyline. He dismounted, carrying the girl inside, where the warmth of his small home replaced the cold bite of the desert. He checked her for injuries, scrapes, bruises, exhaustion, but she'd survived something far worse than the land itself. After giving her water and wrapping her in blankets, Cade lit a lantern and set it on the windowsill, letting the glow spill out into the open darkness. If someone was searching for her, her mother, family, anyone, they'd see the light. He hoped they would. The child finally fell asleep in his bed, clutching the beaded pouch so tightly Cade couldn't pry it loose. He didn't try again. Whatever it held was important to her, maybe even a clue to what had happened. Cade stepped outside, lantern in hand, and scanned the darkening plains. The desert stretched out silent and empty, but he could sense something just beyond sight. Danger, grief, or the echo of a fight he hadn't witnessed. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had rescued someone precious, someone vulnerable, and that meant whoever had caused the gunshots might not be far behind. Cade leaned against the porch rail, the warm lantern swinging in his hand as the night wind brushed past him. He replayed the child's whisper in his mind, "Mama." The word carried more fear than hope. He didn't know whether her mother was alive, hurt, or gone forever, but someone would come looking for the girl. Someone had to. People didn't simply vanish from the desert without leaving wounds behind. And Cade wasn't naive enough to think this was just a child lost on the plains. Something darker had. It happened. Something that had pushed a mother to hide her child and face whatever danger alone. Inside the cabin, the girl stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly in her native tongue. Cade exhaled slowly, glancing one last time at the empty horizon before stepping back inside. He shut the door but didn't lock it, not yet. He wanted her mother, if she was alive, to reach them without fear. But in the pit of his stomach, he knew the desert didn't let trouble rest. Tonight's silence was only a pause, not an ending. Cade hung his hat, checked his rifle, and sat by the dimming fire. He didn't know who he had rescued, but he knew this wasn't the end. Someone good or bad would come looking for the little girl. And when they did, his life would never be the same. Cade tightened his grip on the rifle as the distant hoofbeats faded into the night wind. Naira stood near the hearth, the firelight turning her silhouette into something almost otherworldly. Her daughter slept wrapped in a wool blanket, her tiny breaths steady now, safe for the first time since the attack. Cade forced himself to focus on the danger waiting outside, but every time he looked at Naira he felt a pull he couldn't explain. Respect, admiration, something deeper forming in the space between them. She traced a gentle pattern on her daughter's forehead, then lifted her gaze to Cade, the weight of unspoken truths in her dark eyes. He sensed she carried more than fear. She carried purpose. And she had brought that purpose into his world, whether he was ready or not. Naira finally stepped away from the fire and opened the small beaded pouch her daughter had refused to let go. Cade leaned forward, expecting gold or some stolen treasure, but instead she revealed a folded piece of hide etched with intricate symbols. They looked old, older than the territories, older than any town or mining camp. "My people have guarded this map for generations," she said quietly. "It leads to a spring hidden deep in the mountains, a sacred place, and the richest gold these men have ever heard whispered." Cade exhaled sharply, said that's why they came. They'd kill anyone to get their hands on something like this. Naira nodded. "They already tried." Her voice trembled, "just once. But I will not let them take our land, or my daughter's future." Cade considered everything. The raiders, the map, the child sleeping against his shoulder earlier. He set down his rifle and met Naira's gaze with steady resolve. "You're not fighting them alone." She shook her head. "You don't owe us this." Cade stepped closer. "Maybe I do. Maybe helping you is exactly what I meant to do." The truth hung between them, heavy and real. Before Naira could answer, a sharp crack split the silence, a twig snapping just beyond the window. Cade moved quickly, blowing out the lantern and pulling her gently behind his workbench. The child stirred but didn't wake. Shadows shifted outside, slow and purposeful. More than one man, maybe three, maybe more. Cade's cabin suddenly felt small and fragile against the danger closing in. The first gunshot shattered the window, spraying glass across the room. Naira shielded her daughter instantly, dropping to the floor with practiced swiftness. Cade grabbed his rifle and took position near the doorway. Another shot came, then another, but Cade held his fire, waiting, breath steady. He counted the footsteps, the crunch of gravel, the murmured orders. These weren't desperate bandits. These were organized men who knew exactly what they were after. Naira touched Cade's arm lightly, her eyes clear and fearless. "There is a back exit," she whispered. "We can reach the canyon before they close in." Cade nodded. Staying meant death. Fighting here would only trap them. He scooped the little girl into his arms as Naira grabbed the pouch, and together they slipped out the back into the cold desert night. The moon lit their path as they ran across the open field, keeping low, moving fast toward the shadowed canyon. A bullet tore into the dirt near Cade's boot, but he didn't stop. Naira kept pace beside him, breath sharp but unwavering. They reached a narrow crack between two boulders and slipped inside, concealed by the rock walls. Cade pressed his ear to the stone. Footsteps thundered past the entrance, missing them by inches. Naira placed her hand on the rock, whispering a prayer in her language, thanking the spirits for their protection. Cade watched her, struck again by the strength in her quiet gestures. She was unlike any woman he had ever known. Fierce, loyal, unbreakable. They continued deeper into the canyon where the walls opened into a hidden ravine surrounded by sheer cliffs. Here they finally slowed. The child stirred awake, blinking at the moonlit sky. Naira knelt and kissed her forehead. Cade caught his breath, leaning against a boulder. "They're not stopping," he said. "They'll keep hunting the map." Naira nodded. "That is why I came to you, Cowboy. You saved my daughter, and in our way, that ties us together. Not by debt, by fate." Cade swallowed, trying to understand. She reached for his hand, her touch warm even in the cold desert air. "There is a truth you must hear," she murmured. "My daughter, she is not just a child of my people. Her father was a white man, a ranger who died protecting us. The men hunting us now, they killed him, and they will not allow any of us to live if they find what he died to defend." Cade felt something shift sharply inside him, anger, grief for a man he never knew, and a fierce determination to protect what remained of that family. He looked at the little girl, then at Naira. "You're not losing anyone else," he said firmly. "Not while I'm breathing." Naira's eyes softened, glimmering with something more than gratitude. "Then we stand together," she whispered. Cade nodded. Together, when dawn crept over the ridge, Cade led them toward an old lion shack he had used years ago. There, he set traps, scouted vantage points, and prepared for the fight he knew was coming. Naira stood beside him, bow in hand, steady as stone. They were outnumbered but not outmatched. When the raiders finally reached the ravine, the ambush was swift and ruthless. Cade's rifle cracked through the morning air, dropping the first attacker before the others even realized they were caught. Naira's arrows struck fast and silent, taking down two more as they scrambled for cover. The canyon walls amplified every sound, confusing the surviving men. One tried to flank them. Cade ended it with a single shot. Minutes later, the last man fled on horseback, disappearing into the plains. Silence settled slowly, like dust after a storm. Cade lowered his rifle. Naira stepped toward him, breath shaking slightly now that the danger had passed. Their daughter ran to Cade and hugged his leg tightly as if sensing he had given them their lives back. Naira placed her hand on the girl's shoulder, then looked up at him with eyes full of unspoken meaning. "You changed our fate," she said softly. Cade shook his head. "No, you changed mine." She smiled, a real one this time, warm and unguarded, and took his hand. In that quiet ravine, with the danger behind them and a new future unfolding, Cade understood the truth Naira had promised him. His life had never truly been his own. not until the moment he found a little girl in the sagebrush and the woman who came looking for her.